I am a friend and colleague of the Business Plan for Peace, but more importantly of Scylla and Tiona. And I'm going to moderate the conversation this evening. I'm a member of the Catalyst 2030 organisational movement, and so I've offered to support the conversation this evening. So it's been on back-to-back Zoom calls, as many of us on this call have been, and it takes something to manage this conversation as we get later into the day. So without further ado, I just want to introduce the Catalyst 2030 as an organisation. It's a global, if for some of you who may not have heard of the Catalyst 2030 group before, there was a meeting in January, 75 of us met and launched this campaign and this initiative. It's a global community of social entrepreneurs, funders and other social change innovators that believe collective action and bold new strategies are needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Current prediction is if we do nothing, it will be more like 2094. So the group was initiated by leading social entrepreneurs from Ashoka, Echoing Green, the Schwab Foundation, the Skoll Foundation, and other global networks of social entrepreneurs. And the group is expanding to include governments, funders, bilateral, multilaterals, and others seeking the achievements of the SDGs. And we're talking this evening, as you've all signed up for, one of the most, all of them are important. This is one of, especially at this time, one of the most important. So this campaign and these round table conversations is at large to unify, his campaign is a large unified surge of virtual engagement between policymakers and those with inspiring social entrepreneurs and intermediaries. The series of virtual sessions is aimed at sharing how social innovators are responding to COVID-19, forming collaborative partnerships that can accelerate social change, co-creating policy recommendations based on extensive expertise of social innovators, initiating dialogue with policymakers, funders, and leaders across sectors, share the solutions and jointly work towards the new normal, which is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. So as we begin the conversation this evening, this session and this context is, I'd like to firstly say that given the current situation, there's a huge danger of lapsing into armed violence, and that's exactly what the Business Plan for Peace has been set up to prevent. And the Business Plan for Peace is the first ever costed plan showing how war can be prevented, how peace can be built, what it will cost, and how we can do it, or who can do it. The team work with impact investors to identify the initiatives and projects in conflict prevention and peace building worldwide that are most attractive and viable for impact investment, resulting in a financial or reputational dividend. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Scylla Elworthy, Dr. Scylla Elworthy. Scylla has been 3 times nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She's spent her life's work has been to build peace, transform conflict, and prevent war. And that's over the course of 4 decades. And with her passion, commitment, and dedicated work, I'd like to hand over to Scylla. So please, Scylla. Scylla will be speaking first, and I'd like to also welcome Tiona Williams, who is Scylla's, who's the CEO for the Business Plan for Peace. And Scylla and Tiona are a powerhouse partnership. So I'll hand over to Scylla to kick off the conversation.
Thanks, Karen. Well, I'm thrilled to welcome you all. Am I muted? I hope not. Let me just see. No, I'm not muted. Because we've got a fantastic mix this evening of investors, civil society, corporate representatives, business people, social enterprise people, and academics. So welcome to you all, and thank you for being here. I'm going to plunge straight in and talk about SDG16. As you probably know from the UN text, it says to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Now, the recent Phoenix Capital report showed, and I was shocked, that from those investors surveyed, UN Sustainable Development Goal 16 is the least invested of all the SDGs by far. I think Dennis was there at that meeting, and there are people from Phoenix Capital here joining us. But by contrast, SDG 16 was voted the 4th most popular of all SDGs in a survey conducted by the OECD. To put that in context, recent UN research from the World Bank as well points to this urgent need for the international community to refocus on building peaceful societies and preventing violent conflict, which they calculate could now save between $5 billion and $70 billion per year. When you contrast that with the fact that we're spending $1.9 trillion on militarization and war worldwide every year, the sums are extraordinary. So I just want to quickly run through the case for investment. Businesses frequently come together to lobby for their interests, but they tend to overlook one enormous threat to those interests, and that's the threat of violence. The costs of rioting, civil disorder, and war are not only borne by the state, but by businesses whose normal activities are then disrupted. The violence, for example, that we're going to hear about that broke out in Kenya following the election of 2007, and which lasted less than 3 months, was estimated to have caused losses of more than £35 million to the tourist industry in Kenya alone. This threat is overlooked because businesses assume that they can't do anything about it. So they leave it to the state in the form of the police and the legal system. That's after the event, after losses have been suffered or investment cancelled. Instead, as we've found, they can take steps to prevent violence. They can come together not to lobby others or do something, get somebody else to do something about it, but to do something themselves. And that's what we're going to look at this evening. They could set up conflict prevention systems, which, like the cost of an insurance policy paid annually, would save the devastating expense of any serious outbreak of violence. It's common sense. And it's not always the case that what makes commercial sense for a particular business also makes good sense ethically. In this case, it does. Violence doesn't only hit turnover and profits, it hits people. It causes untimely deaths and leaves lives and hopes shattered. So to invest in conflict prevention is to support the most basic of human values. And Dylan Matthews, who's with us today, the CEO of Peace Direct, knows that firsthand because he works with literally hundreds of locally led peace initiatives worldwide where local people prevent other people killing each other. So there are many ways that this investment could be made, many models that could be followed. So first, we're going to hear a short case study from one country which has done it. And in our written material, we've got 14 other examples, and I will describe another one closer to home. And then we'll very much invite your comments and go into more of the detail of what can be done. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tiona to talk about one particular example of how this works.
Thank you.
Just before we kick off, Tiona, I wonder if everybody would just take a moment before you hear the information, just to take a moment, just take a deep breath, and just really come back into listening and being able to engage fully in what you're about to hear, and perhaps pop into the chat room what you're hearing, what you're feeling in the world right now, and any comment that you'd like to make in terms of what you're perhaps why you're here, or what you're noticing and why you're feeling. We just like to have, we can't have your voices, but if we could have an entry into the chat room, that would be valuable, just to really just presence yourself into the conversation and be able to hear fully what Tiona's about to share. So if you could just take a moment and just check in for yourself about how what Scylla's just said, how it's landed with you, and really why you're here and what's so important about this conversation right now. And please, Tiona.
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to engage with you all today, this evening. Depends where you are in the world. I'm in England and it's the evening. Yeah, I think following on from what Scylla said, the example of Kenya is worth exploring or sharing. And Scylla highlighted the amount of money or indicated some of the money that was lost through the violence that took place in Kenya at the beginning of 2008, as soon as the elections were finished in December 2007. Of course, it's not only the money. It cost well over 1,000 lives, and thousands more were displaced. And so we're really looking at the human cost on every level that, in this case, electoral violence caused. And it's worth saying up front that in 2013 and then in 2017, in other words, the two subsequent elections that took place in Kenya, there was next to no violence, and the elections passed. They were considered free and fair, as many of you may well know. And why was that? So I just want to talk about the role of the private sector, because the role that the private sector played was key in the change that we saw in Kenya. And so we're talking about the private sector in its totality. So whether you're an investor, an individual or family office investor, or whether you have a business, a large business or a smaller business, we're talking about the private sector in its greater capacity. So the private sector is indispensable in conflict prevention. And it's only now, it's increasingly being realized, but it still seems as a bit of an add-on when people remember to think about the private sector. But Kenya shows such a good example. So after the violence in 2007 and 2008, the Kenyan Private Sector Alliance, its acronym is KEPSA, it was set up and really came into action, realizing having suffered the impact of the violence, joined and collaborated together with civil society and many other actors. They basically saw that they had a role to play. And through their engagement, so they were looking at the social, they needed to consider their performance socially as well as commercially. They saw the disruption that violence had caused and therefore the loss of money and the loss of lives. So KEPSA, which comprised over 100,000 members, so it was a very large alliance. They cooperated closely, as I said, with civil society. And they spearheaded a three-phased public communication campaign, garnering support for peaceful elections, of course, as well as funding peace forums, preventing incitement, disseminating conciliation narratives. So they engaged with with the media. They engaged at community level, at every level, where they felt, depending on who they were, those individual members, where they felt they could play their part and play their role, including the judiciary. So the judiciary had recently been, subsequent to the violence, the judiciary was reformed. And so they were even playing their role in some of the basic elements of the state apparatus. And the difference was stark by the time it came to 2013, and then again, we saw the benefit of that by 2017. And I think one of the things to highlight about what their involvement gave, or how they contributed, was to set up a very clear structure and system. So we call it an architecture for peace. But that architecture or infrastructure at every level of society enabled people to change narratives and change behavior, which played a large part in helping the country deal with those future elections more peacefully. I think I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, or if Scilla wants to complement what I've said, she knows this case as well as I do. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just go on to give one other example, a brief one, but it's pretty close to home for us in the UK, and that's the example of Northern Ireland. As you may remember, by 1990, the conflict had been raging for 20 years with huge loss of life. The British Army had been there for 20 years using force to try and bring about peace unsuccessfully. And in 1994, the Northern Ireland Confederation of Business and Industry commissioned a paper, and it was called, interestingly, Peace, a Challenging New Era. This was while the violence was still going on. And they were able to show that bringing peace to Northern Ireland would pay a significant peace dividend to the economy by reducing the need for funds for security, the huge amounts of business funds that were going to providing security for their workers and their workplaces. And so they formed something called the Group of Seven. That was the Confederation of British Industry and 7 industry associations, including hospitality, trade unions, the Economic Council, and so on. And because of this breadth of membership, they could speak on behalf of economic interests very broadly. And they brought this political voice of advocacy for the economic opportunities that peace could bring. And that obviously involved their neutrality. But it was this combined voice of business and industry and their neutrality that helped them make the Good Friday Agreement negotiated by Tony Blair happen in 1998. So that's another very concrete example of what can happen. I think it's probably a good idea if we pause right there to see if any of you have questions. Because I know you're coming from many different backgrounds, from investment, from grassroots work with peace builders, from society, from social impact groups, and Deborah from a background in banking. So what occurs to you that we might or might not be able to answer? You have to unmute yourselves if you want to speak. Dennis, is that you unmuting?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Scilla. Thank you, Tona, sorry for that. Looking at the current situation in our world, we have to deal with COVID. We have to deal with all kinds of crises, like climate change, inequalities, etc. Do you see any early warnings? Where's also an interest from the financial perspective in our current world that make it more tangible to act in relation to the insecurity people now feel in the world, to bring it more close to their lives, because sometimes peace it's a little bit far away. So in the framing, do you see that there are possibilities and opportunities to connect it to what's happening now in the world?
I think this is a very tangible question, very timely one, because any of us who've been cooped up, in certainly if you've been with a large family on the 10th floor of a tower block and nowhere to go, you will know all about what tensions arise in families, even families who've got more space. So one of the things we've done at the Business Plan for Peace is to bring out a little booklet called The Mighty Heart: How to Transform Conflict, whether it's in the family, the community, the workplace, online, or in government. And we've singled out the methodologies that work to actually prevent and resolve conflict before it blows out into something really violent. But what you're prompting, Dennis, is the question of what's going to be happening in places that haven't got the health facilities that we have in the West, countries where, as in India, millions of workers were made redundant and told to go home, and they had to walk sometimes hundreds of miles with no food and then be turned back when they got home. So the triggers and the flashpoints for violence are huge as a result of the pandemic. So I think this is a very important time to be nudging and awakening investors. And many of you on this call will know the kind of investors who will understand this and put money behind the 25 SDG16 examples that we know of that need investment right now. And we can make that link, we can connect the investor either directly with that initiative. Dylan Matthews of Peace Direct will know many, many more examples. I think there's probably an unlimited number of wide open possibilities for investors, even not huge amounts of money, where the investor can derive either a reputational dividend or, in some cases, a small financial dividend. It's not a way you're going to make a lot of money, but you could be stopping a conflict which might ignite a whole area. Does that kind of respond to what you're asking, Dennis?
Yeah, and maybe this morning I was in a webinar with investors worldwide, and most of the investors, they are risk averse. They hate uncertainty. So how can SDG60, especially investing in SDG60, be an enabler to create more certainties and deal with the uncertainties in the world? Because we are now in a phase of uncertain.
Exactly. And if you turn the question on its head and let's put it out to other people in the group, there's no greater uncertainty than armed violence in the street, the huge numbers of migrants that would be caused and so forth. So investing in prevention is a very sensible thing to do. And you can't have, obviously, certainty, but you can't really have certainty with any investment. What do other people in the group think about that? Dylan?
Yeah, I just wanted to try and respond to Dennis's point there. I think you're absolutely right that it entails risk. In fact, we are asking investors and donors to embrace a higher risk threshold. And the way that we describe it is, if you think about the venture capital world, you know, venture capitalists will invest in 10 companies and assume 9 will go bust. But that one that they invest in will be big, and they'll win big on that. Venture capitalists know that there's a sort of, there's failure that you have to accept as part of your investment. And that actually, if you spread your, you know, as long as you're spreading your investments, I think you will assume that some won't work, but those that do work, they are spectacularly successful. And that's what we see even in peace building. We know that peace building is hard. We know that it is fraught with risk. So we're not denying that at all. But what we're saying is that some of those risks are really worth taking because the payoff can be quite substantial. And I'll give you a couple of examples just very quickly. We're supporting some work in Eastern Congo in the artisanal gold mines of Eastern Congo. Gold could be the biggest single export earner for Congo, bigger than coltan, bigger than some of the other minerals that they have. None of the gold that is produced in Eastern Congo out of the artisanal mines is regularized. None of it goes through the formal system. It's all informal. It's all smuggled out of the country. The country doesn't earn any tax income. It's not supporting the development of the country because it's in the hands of militias. And so it's frankly a mess. So we decided to invest in 2 cooperatives over the last 3 years to see whether or not we could equip them with the skills and the resources to help deal with conflict non-violently, regularize those 2 mines to provide sustainable incomes for not only their families, but also produce ethical and environmentally friendly gold that could be exported. People told us it was impossible. Congo, this is almost a failed state. Nothing goes right in Congo was the message that we continue to hear, and we do not agree at all. So over the last 3 years, we've been investing in these 2 cooperatives. Just one of those cooperatives produces $200,000 of gold a month. Now, that's one of tens of thousands of artisanal gold mines. Not only are they producing now what would be regarded as sort of fair trade, ethical gold, they're now investing that in their community. That now is then being seen by government as a legitimate source of income. So it's being monitored in the appropriate ways. It's not going into the hands of the militias. More importantly, in an area which is absolutely beset by violence, we have 2 communities, 2 cooperatives that have resisted all violence. And in this particular part of the country, there's widespread violence. So we have an immediate commercial sort of payoff in that those miners are wealthier, more prosperous. The gold is ethical and environmentally friendly. The country benefits because they're getting tax revenue. It's going to be starting to be exported. Everyone wins in that. There's a legitimate business interest there. And we're now looking at some of the big concession holders, the big companies, who might be able to then work with the artisanal gold miners. So there are cases like that where if you had gone back 3 years, most investors would have said, we won't touch this. Armed groups, a lot of violence, a lot of corruption, militias, etc. But we invested, and it wasn't cheap. It was about $500,000. But that $500,000 is now producing $200,000 a month in one mine, and we are supporting 2. And that's about 2,000 families are being supported by that. So it's a very significant impact, a return on investment. And as Scylla said, some of those can't be quantified in terms of money. That one can, because it's about gold. Others are about lives saved, communities that are stabilized. And but of course there's a business interest there, because once you have communities that are stable, they become, they want to develop their houses, their families, they want to send their kids to school, they want to have prosperous businesses. And we've seen that in other parts of the world where we support work, even in places like Somalia, where we've helped young people get jobs. 1,600 people in an area that was beset by violence now have jobs as a result of some of the small loans that we provided. So it's almost like an island of peace now. There are communities that are more peaceful and hopefully more prosperous. But I do think that there's a question there about the risk that investors are willing to take, because as you say, for every one of those successes, I can also describe in great detail the failures, where we've put in, invested in money and actually, and time and effort and love and attention and solidarity. And actually it hasn't worked. And that's because building peace is a complex process, which takes time. And however, you can't control the ecosystem. The ecosystem is, you know, influenced by so many people and so many factors. So we have to just keep trying. And I think for those that do succeed, they shine a light on what's possible, and we hope that that can then galvanize support for others. So it is investable. Peace is investable, but it is something that is a challenge. I can see the PR problem in terms of violence, you know, affecting certain countries. But I also wanted to say one last thing, Dennis. You know, I think there's a perception of the violence being elsewhere. You know, it's someone else's problem. But think about the violence that took over Hong Kong with the peaceful protests that were met with very significant violence by the state authorities. And look at the economic effects it had on a very prosperous part of the world. So the same could be said for the London riots, you know, almost 10 years ago. So it isn't just what's happening over there. We need to be building peace, you know, in all of our societies to ensure that, you know, our communities are safer and more prosperous.
Thanks, Dylan.
Sheila, do you allow me to share some of my experiences, to go a bit in the sense of Dylan?
Yes.
About how peace can be investable. So maybe I try to be short, but so I'm a partner of an asset management company based in Geneva, the City of Peace. I'm a member of the board of the International Committee of the Red Cross, in charge of innovative financing, and I'm a co-founder of Blue Orchard Finance, which is an impact investing company recently sold to Schroders. And what I think we should be more proactive in saying peace is a business case. There is a business case for peace. First, my experience with Blue Orchards, which is now managing a portfolio of over $4 billion US, is that in investing in microfinance institutions, in frontier market, in some very fragile market. Blue Orchard portfolio has loans in Palestine, in Jordan, in Iraq, in some very fragile country in Africa and in South America. Our portfolio of loans yield over the 20 years a LIBOR plus 2% with a monthly liquidity. And we have a big pension fund investing with us, insurance company. So woman empowerment through entrepreneurship is a very powerful tool for building peace, I believe. And that typically is now an asset class. And we need to promote it and to better understand it. And so that, I think that's one point. On my ICRC experience, being a financier, and a member of the governing body of the ICRC, my partners asked me to drive a bit the innovative financing process, and we launched 2 years ago a so-called humanitarian impact bond, about 30 million of Swiss franc, which was invested in war countries in Africa for building up orthopedic hospital. Orthopedy being an important job for ICRC in war context, as you may know. The construction of a social impact bond is a pay-on-result system, and we attracted about more than 30 million of private investors with a potential yield of -7% to +7%. Sincerely, I believe we will reach 2-3% in Swiss franc, which is a very high return, knowing that the interest rate in Swiss franc are negative. And the measure of the yield is based on a impact matrix on the social impact of the invested money. And the outcome funders are states, Switzerland, of course, but Italy, Belgium, and even a big foundation, the Caixa Foundation. And they will pay at the end of the bond the yield to the social investors who were ready to take that risk, based on the real social impact of the operation of ICRC in those countries. And I tell you, that investment will yield a very decent return, risk return adjusted. And the social investors are foundation, family offices, big insurances, Munich Re, for instance. And so I think innovative financing, the social impact bond mechanism, could be a very interesting way of pouring money into those countries. And the third experience I would love to share, you know it, Sheila, but is our CATMOS engagement fund. For 15 years, we are managing big portfolios of companies, multinational companies. And 3 years ago, we decided to add the SDG16 in our engagement, and we launched the Peace Investment Fund, which is invested in very big companies like Nestle, Microsoft, even the terrible Facebook. And we are engaging with those companies, trying to tell them that there is a business case on the SDG16, and trying to encourage them to venture into peace investment. You should know, you know for sure, but that the biggest foreign direct investment in war context, in fragile countries, is driven by multinational companies, just before remittances. And then you have the development banks, and then very later on you have the humanitarians, and the peace builders are quite insignificant. So big multinationals have a huge investment power in those contexts. And we try to tell them that through human resources, best practices, responsible sourcing, community building, anti-corruption, they could really drive investment, which will build peace. And what I would like to share with you and your friends today is that those big multinationals are more than interested to know more about SDG16, because they all think, okay, but SDG16 is something for the states, it's not for us. Peace and justice is a state issue, a public issue, it's not a private issue. And when we tell them that they in fact have a huge power in those fragile contexts, they all of a sudden open eyes and wants to start discussion. I give you an example because we team up with the Peace Nexus Foundation, you know well, Sheila, for technical assistance and for helping us in accompanying those companies. We recently decided to help Nestle, who's investing $500,000. It's not a lot yet, but in Congo, RDC, for their coffee revival initiative, Coffee for Peace of Nespresso. And Peace Nexus will help Nestle to do right in terms of empowering the right farmers, the right families, accompanying the stakeholder issue, even the soils issues and things like that. And we should realize that in investing in global companies, I don't want to sell my funds tonight, but in investing in a global portfolio of multinational and behaving like an active owner, helping the companies with on the SDG16, among other issues, of course, it's not our exclusive angle. We have a huge interest. I'd give you just one example, and if you and your friends could come back to me with idea which will give us soft power, that would be great. I give you one very striking example. We had the visit in Geneva of Miranda Sissons. I don't know if you know her, but she recently joined Facebook for running the Human Rights Department and Peace Building the department. And she's a social activist. She told me, I'm not working for Facebook, but for human rights and peace. And I have a free avenue in front of me. They told me, do whatever you think is good for peace and human rights through the Facebook, through 3 billion people network. And she is really looking for idea. She can, if she can drive into the company powerful ideas which will benefit for a more inclusive society in fragile context, which could somehow benefits to the Facebook goodwill as well, she might have a huge power. That woman is a social activist, and she's at the core of Facebook. Not to say about Microsoft. Jean-Yves Hart, who's head of partnership for Microsoft, he has a direct link with Brad Smith, is based in Geneva, where everything is happening in terms of humanitarian issues and so on. And we have discussion with him about artificial intelligence and famine prevention. So all those companies are, in fact, realizing that they could do something. So I'm a bit an advocate for, if you are an investor, be an active owner. And being an active owner, don't only engage about shareholder value or, you know, corporate responsibility, but go one step ahead and try to have a dialogue, and more than that, provide ideas on the SDG16, because the companies are waiting on that. And shareholders are so lazy and so far away of the companies that there are very few investors. And as you said, Phoenix selected the Peace Fund because, in fact, it's the only solution of public equities investment focusing on peace. And maybe I could just add one thing and then I will stop. But being very much involved in innovative financing mechanism, we have discussion with some of our big multinationals. They have bigger turnover than a lot of United Nations countries. So they are very powerful, but they need to have shareholders challenging them. I believe that innovative finance, like social impact bond mechanism or social impact incentive, could be very interesting. Just as an example, if you can find a very powerful idea for a company, let's say Facebook, of contributing to SDG 16 within, in a sense which can be measurable with precise metrics, that's an ideal scope for building up a social impact bond or peace impact bond, and tap big foundation looking for alternative investment, decorrelated type of risk and return on one side, and public money, which is looking for partnership with the private sector. And so I really hope that we can share ideas, and if I could help in challenging those ideas into our portfolio companies, I think we could achieve something very big. And our investor, just as an example, last year they get a return of 25% in equities because the stock market jumped. This year the fund is declining, of course, but much better, is behaving much better than the market. So you can yield a classical risk return in having as well an impact in engaging with the companies which are very open and looking for solution and ideas. So that is my three experience I wanted to share with you tonight.
Thank you, Melchior. You're absolutely full of facts which lighten my heart and make me very excited. I'd like nothing better than to renew this discussion with you that we started over a year ago. Catherine, did you want to come in here?
Yes, I did. Hello, everybody. I came a bit late. I'm sorry. My name is Catherine Wajaku, and I am working as an independent consultant at the moment, but I, for 5 years, worked at the OECD as the head of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building. And whilst I was there, we developed with BNP Paribas Asset Management a proposal just along the lines that Melchior was describing. In fact, it's music to my ears to hear that investor appetite for great ideas on peace building is getting larger and larger. I mean, I will send and share with everybody. We developed a piece of work basically putting together proposals for action in 3 areas. One, building very much on ICRC's peace in social impact bond. We were proposing at the same time a peace bond for fragile environments particularly. And also we made recommendations about the possibility, also building on Peace Nexus's work. In fact, we stole loads of ideas from Peace Nexus on certification, because investors will ask you, so how do we know if something is peace promoting as an investment? Okay, we have the SDG16, but I think for a long time, Peace Nexus has been doing work which is broader than SDG16, looking at environmental and social standards and so on. So we were very much advocating movement in that direction as well. The third issue, and I think I'm not sure if it's come up already, is that based on what we know from the peace building field and how complicated it is, as Peace Direct colleague also highlighted, you would need in some ways at a country level some way of having an oversight, a broader kind of a civil society, sort of multi-stakeholder oversight of what investments actually end up doing when translated into company practice. And from the conflict sensitivity field, I do a lot of work with CDA Collaborative, who've done very interesting research looking at actually, what has been the contribution of business to peace, and they published quite recently with PRIO and a number of others, a very interesting set of case studies over 5 continents looking at what's actually happened. And they've always said that, one, we know that in terms of business practice, it's when you have, as Chiona was pointing out, you have a kind of a collective of actors working together, different businesses working together, that you actually get some change. But also, it is not necessarily the case that business is in and of itself a neutral actor. So what we know in the conflict sensitivity field is that business can also be part and parcel of the conflict configuration, let's call it that. And so that's the reason why we insisted, when we were doing this work with BNP Paribas, that having some kind of mechanism in country where you would enable oversight and the building of some transparency over what actually happens when the investment leads to business operational work is vital, because we know in conflict and fragile situations that the question of who gets what in terms of investment is key. In terms of business activity, who gets the benefits, that's often the cause of conflict in the first place. So there's, we were very interested in how to kind of link the wealth of knowledge in the peace building and conflict sensitivity field with an offer about investment as a peace promoting agenda. Because it's complicated, but I think it would be too easy kind of to divorce the investment side. You build a bond, for example, you build a social impact bond that's supposed to be promoting peace. But if you do not have in place a way of evaluating what actually happens in terms of how the money gets spent, then you could be actually doing something in the opposite direction. So the question I would have on the ICRC's investment, we've got figures of like 3% you were suggesting in terms of rate return on investment, and the focus being the orthopedic hospitals and so on. But who gets access? The question would have to be who gets access to that, and are we building in also scope for going the whole way on it? Exactly. So yeah, just sharing some thoughts with you, and would be very interested in following up, sharing the work that we did, and also perhaps following up on the conversations with Melchior on this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Scilla, I'm very aware of the time, and I know we need to finish on the top of the hour. I just wanted to presence what you began the conversation with as well. There is the purpose of these roundtable conversations is we have a unique opportunity, as not only regions and geographies that we know are fragile, but the world is. So we're all feeling that fragility right now, and we're all aware of how important this topic is. And I wonder if you could bring something or speak to this moment in time, given what we're in and where we might be headed. How can we use the work that you and Tiona have been bringing with these partnerships to really make the biggest difference right now, when this opportunity and people are so aware of humanity and the good qualities, but also the fragility of where we are right now? Yeah. Do you have any questions, thoughts, or requests?
Well, thanks, Karen. I think what we've had is a really big, grand spectrum of what's possible, from the impact bonds right through to the work that Dylan does, which is hands-on with local people through Peace Direct. So my instinct is to suggest that those who would wish to continue the conversation, because I found this incredibly useful and rich, those who'd like to continue the conversation, send us your email, your contacts. I know I'm going to be talking with Catherine on Friday anyway, with Tiona, but if Melchior, I'd love to talk some more with you, but do please, I think all our contacts are probably on the website of Catalyst 2030, but if not, make sure we get your email, and we would love to pretty quickly pull this together, what we've heard this evening. I've been making masses of notes as you've been speaking. And any of those who haven't spoken, Rolf or Andreas, if there's something that sparks your interest and you want to just mention it now.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So if we can hear from Rolf first and then over to Andreas. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, exciting to be in such a unique group with so many skilled people from many, many different levels, and I'm blown away by your skills and knowledge and enthusiasm and work you do. So I feel very small in this huge group. But okay, I'm working from in a perspective of changing the world also. I had a dream 8 years ago about bringing new and sustainable building systems to the world, and the past few years, couple of years, also bringing new agricultural systems to the world. The dream I have is building eco-villages. So in many ways, my dream is also to create peace on Earth by empowering people with better and cheaper housing, more sustainable housing, costing less with no or little maintenance cost, and having food production systems scaled down to personal production in people's backyards or vertical farming on top of buildings. So I have connected with some eco-friendly enthusiasts in several countries where we have the solutions. And now in the midst of the COVID-19, I have been lucky enough to meet new people such as yourselves on a daily basis, more than ever before. Mm-hmm. So I see that the skills and the knowledge in this group and in similar groups from the Catalyst 2030 webinars and other webinars are such of importance to help bring forward both our own ideas and ideas from our partners to get them executed on the ground with influential people such as yourselves to help fuel the necessary opening of doors in the right places. Because there are so many entrepreneurs out there, which we also cooperate with, which have great ideas. They don't have the skills and the experience to bring things forward. So we need your help and by others also to bring things forward in front of the right people in different countries. So thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. Please, Andreas.
Well, maybe a short statement from my side. I worked the last 15 years with MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, and several conflict zones. As a coordinator, I have no medical background, and the time is short, so I'll try to summarize my experiences with the combatants who have been treated in our facilities, and also the traditional leaders I met in these places. And when I asked them what drove them to join a group to fight, it was always the same answer. I want to marry, and I have no other chance to create income for myself than joining this group, which offers me a sum of whatever, roughly $1,000 US. It's more or less everywhere the same. And usually they never turn back, or they turn back wounded or dead. And this is wherever, if it was South Sudan, if it was Somalia, if it was Afghanistan, it was everywhere the same. So if we channel the investment to create jobs, that would definitely would have an impact on peace, because this is also something what the late Lake Chad conference, the traditional leaders have said. What we need from you are jobs. This would prevent our young men, our boys, from joining the fight and leaving the villages. So that's maybe the last sentence I can make, because our time is short. But I would love to continue discussing with you, because I'm not a peace builder per se, but I have a lot of experience in working in these places. And yeah, I'm happy to stay in touch.
That would be very valuable, Andreas. Thank you.
So Scilla, please, closing words, my dear.
Well, what we will definitely do is take this forward. So I presume, Karen, do you know if Catalyst has a website, or
Absolutely. Catalyst certainly has a fabulous website. You can find out more on the website. The purpose of this group is that exactly what's happened today, you find new partners, ways of collaborating, so that we can have the greatest impact. And as Rolf said, your eco-villages, basically same message. So it's really important that we're all gathering to have the collective impact. So yes, on the website you can find, and also this recording will be available.
And also, if I can just add that I've put our email addresses, and other people have as well, into the chat.
Great. That's wonderful. So what we will undertake to do is write up some notes from the recording, circulate it to you all, and make some proposals that we might take forward, either in 2s and 3s or in a larger group. But I think just the combination of the skills that have been around this virtual table are a thrilling indication of what's possible. I'm deeply encouraged, and I thank you all, and look forward to talking with you individually or collectively. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Karen, for hosting this. Will you
Pleasure. And also, everyone, we're pulling a report together based on this conversation. So it's really important that you can make a contribution to that report. And please, we'll let you know how to do that. And I'm just looking, yeah, great. And Scilla and Tiona will be able to let you know. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Scilla. Thank you, Tiona, for your great work, and for everyone.